The Regal Theater smelled like cigarette smoke and old velvet. It had been built in the 1920s, a grand room for a grand neighborhood, and even now, 40 years later, the walls held something of that original ambition, a faded elegance that hadn't quite given up. The South Side crowd that packed it on Friday and Saturday nights didn't come for elegance. They came for the music. They always came for the music. Backstage, the corridor was narrow, painted cinder block, exposed bulbs, a folding table pushed against one wall with paper cups, and a coffee urn no one had touched. The smell back here was different, sweat and rosin, and the particular metallic warmth of amplifiers left running too long. The Jackson 5 had finished their set 40 minutes earlier. They were good. Even the people who didn't say it out loud knew it. A family act out of Gary, Indiana, 5 brothers ranging from teenager to toddler, anchored by the smallest one who sang like he was trying to reach something the rest of the room couldn't see. The crowd had responded to them. Applause, a few screams from the younger girls near the front. The kind of reception that told a band they'd survive the night. Maybe even be remembered. But the night belonged to someone else. Joseph Jackson stood near the corridor entrance, speaking with a promoter in low, deliberate tones. He was a careful man with careful eyes, and he kept one hand loose at his side in the way of someone who wanted to appear relaxed but wasn't. Tito and Jackie were somewhere behind him, horsing around near the equipment cases. Marlon was half asleep on a bench. Michael was not with any of them. He had drifted quietly, the way 9-year-olds drift when the adults stop watching. Not with any plan, not toward anything specific, just following the pull of something he couldn't have named. He had heard the sound checks earlier, the low, sustained notes coming through the walls from the main stage. Something in those frequencies had settled in his chest like a second heartbeat, and he had spent the last 20 minutes trying to get closer to the source without anyone noticing he'd moved. He found a spot at the far end of the corridor, near a half-open door that led to a stairwell. From here, he could see a sliver of the backstage area. Equipment cases stacked high, a few roadies moving with the practiced efficiency of men who had loaded and unloaded the same gear in 50 different cities. And beyond them, partially visible, a figure sitting alone on a road case. Jimi Hendrix was tuning his guitar. He wasn't performing. There was no one watching him, or he didn't seem to think there was. He sat slightly hunched, the Stratocaster balanced across one knee, his ear dropped close to the headstock. His fingers moved in small adjustments, turning the pegs by fractions, listening. Just listening. The guitar made almost no sound this way. Unplugged, passive, and yet the attention he gave it was total, as if he were deciphering something written in a language only he could read. Michael didn't move. He stood in the shadow of the doorframe and watched, and something in the quality of his watching changed. He had seen guitarists before. He had grown up watching guitarists, living with guitarists, being surrounded by the instrument since before he could properly speak. He knew what a man with a guitar looked like. He knew the poses and the flourishes and the way musicians held themselves when they wanted to seem like they were playing rather than actually playing. This was not that. There was no performance in it. The man on the road case wasn't presenting himself to anyone. He was just present, inside something. The guitar and the man and the silence around them were all the same thing. And Michael, 9 years old, standing in a corridor that smelled like cigarette smoke and old velvet, understood this in a way he could not have articulated then and would spend the rest of his life trying to explain. He wasn't sure how long he stood there. Long enough that his feet began to ache. Long enough that the roadies finished their work and disappeared, and the backstage area went quiet except for the distant thrum of the crowd on the other side of the wall. Then Jimmy looked up. He looked directly at the half-open door, directly at Michael. Michael didn't run. He wasn't sure why. Some instinct told him that running would be the wrong response to that gaze. Calm, unhurried, neither surprised nor unsurprised. Just seeing. "You were out front earlier," Jimmy said. Not a question. Michael stepped slightly into the light. "Yes, sir." A beat. "You're the one who sings." "Yes, sir." Jimmy looked at him for a moment longer. Then he looked back down at the guitar. His fingers found a chord shape. Not playing it, just resting there. "How old are you?" "9. Jimmy didn't respond to that. He let it sit in the air for a moment, which Michael would later understand was a kind of respect. He didn't say, "Nine, wow," or "that's something," or any of the things adults said when a child did something that surprised them. He just received the information and held it. "You nervous?" Jimmy asked. "Out there." Michael thought about it. "Before," he said. "Not when I'm singing." Jimmy nodded slowly, the way someone nods when an answer confirms something they already suspected. "That's the difference," he said. He wasn't talking to Michael specifically. He seemed to be saying it to the room, or to himself, or to no one. Then he looked up again. "You want to hear something?" What happened in the next few minutes would be reconstructed, analyzed, and mythologized over the following decades, mostly because Michael himself would refer to it obliquely, carefully, in the way of someone handling something fragile, in interviews throughout his career. He never named the night directly. He never said Regal Theater or October or even the year. What Jimmy played was not a finished song, it was not a performance, and it was not meant to be one. He plugged the Stratocaster into a small practice amp near the road case, the kind of amp that barely filled a bedroom, and he began to play something that had no name because it didn't need one. It was a fragment, a sentence in a language made of intervals. He played it slowly. He played it quietly. The amp was turned so low that the sound barely reached past the two of them, contained in that narrow corridor like something private, like something shared, and the corridor changed. There was a specific quality to the way Jimmy played in those unguarded moments that his recorded work only partially captured. A patience, an unhurriedness, as if he had all the time that had ever existed and none of it was being wasted. He didn't fill space. He moved through it. Each note was placed with the deliberateness of someone choosing words in a language they loved. He bent a string slowly, let the pitch rise and hang in the air, then released it with a softness that made the descent feel like something earned. His eyes were half closed. He wasn't watching his hands. He didn't need to. Michael stood very still. He had been in front of crowds since he was 6 years old. He had been on stages, in studios, under lights, and he had learned to manage the distance between himself and the people watching him. Learned to project outward, to send something across the space between performer and audience, and trust it would land. What Jimmy was doing was the opposite. He was not projecting outward. He was pulling inward, going somewhere so completely that the music became a byproduct of the going, not the destination itself. The sound wasn't being sent anywhere. It simply existed, around and between them, the way air exists. Michael would say years later, not in an interview, not publicly, but to a close friend who repeated it only after Michael was gone, that it was the first time he understood that music could be a place, not a performance, not a product, a place you could go, a place that existed independently of any stage or any crowd or any version of yourself that other people needed you to be. The fragment Jimmy played lasted perhaps 2 minutes, maybe less. It resolved into something almost like silence, the final note held until it faded past the point of hearing, leaving only the ghost of itself. Michael had not moved. Had not, he would later feel certain, breathed. Jimmy set the guitar down across his knees and looked at the boy in the doorway. "You felt that," Jimmy said. It wasn't a question either. Joseph Jackson found his son 7 minutes later. He came around the corner of the corridor at a pace that suggested he had been looking for a while and had decided not to appear as though he had been looking. His eyes moved from Michael to the man on the road case and back to Michael. "Mike," a single word. "Come here." Michael came, but he stopped before he fully left the doorway and turned back. Jimmy was already looking at him, the same look as before, unhurried, receiving. "What do I do?" Michael asked. 9 years old in a corridor backstage at the Regal Theater, asking a question he couldn't entirely define. Jimmy seemed to understand the question exactly. He thought about it for a moment, a real moment, not a polite pause. "Same thing I do," he said finally. "Find the place. Go there. Don't explain it." Joseph Jackson's hand came down on Michael's shoulder, gentle but decisive, and steered him away down the corridor. Michael went. He didn't look back again. He didn't need to. The Jackson Five signed with Motown the following year. By 1970, they were everywhere. On the radio, on television, in the rooms and kitchens and bedrooms of a generation. Michael was the center of it, the smallest and the brightest, the one the camera loved and the crowd followed. He moved on stage in ways that no one had quite seen before, something between dance and instinct, each gesture precise and yet somehow inevitable, as if the music had always contained that movement, and he was simply the first one to find it there. People asked him, over the years, where it came from. The movement, the quality of the performance. That thing he had that other performers didn't. He had different answers at different times. In a 1983 interview, a journalist noted that Michael had a specific way of going still on stage. A sudden, complete stillness in the middle of a song, a beat of absolute quiet before the next movement, that felt almost more powerful than the movement itself. Where did that come from, the journalist asked. Michael smiled in the way he smiled when a question had touched something real. He looked away from the camera for a moment. I learned it from someone, he said. A long time ago, backstage somewhere. The journalist waited for a name. It didn't come. He showed me that the silence is part of it, Michael said, that what you don't do is as important as what you do. He paused. I was very young. I don't think he knew I was going to remember it like that. Jimi Hendrix died in September 1970. Michael was 12 years old. He was in a recording studio when someone came in with the news. He didn't react the way the adults in the room reacted. The sharp intake of breath, the murmured disbelief. He went quiet. Just went quiet, in the way of someone absorbing something that has traveled a long distance to reach them and has arrived finally and has to be received properly. He finished the session. He did his work. He went home. The corridor at the Regal Theater was never mentioned in any authorized biography. No one thought to ask about it. Michael was 9 years old, and the Man on the Road case was already famous. And the world in 1968 had not yet developed a framework for caring about what happened in the spaces between the performances, in the corridors and the stairwells and the brief minutes between the sets. But the boy who had stood in the doorway and listened, that boy did not forget. He carried it with him through every stage he would ever stand on, through every version of himself he would ever construct and deconstruct and rebuild, through all the noise and all the attention and all the years. Find the place. Go there. Don't explain it. The last note held until it fades past the point of hearing, leaving only the ghost of itself.